Hello everyone, I pray you're all well. You're welcome to today's lecture on Introduction to Soil Physics. By definition, soil physics is a branch of soil science that deals with the state and transport of matter and transformations of energy in the soil. It can also be defined as the study of physical properties or processes that take place within the soil. Soil physics has a branch called soil edaphology, which is the science of dealing with application of soil physics to agricultural land use. It is important to have knowledge about the soil physical properties because one, they influence how soil functions and how it can be managed. Mainly, most of the agriculture and engineering projects depend on the soil physical properties. Then growth and occurrence of crop species is also related to the physical properties of soil. Movement of water, nutrients and pollutants is also closely related to the physical properties of soil. The soil physical properties are also the basis of classifying soils. And then we also see that these properties are the basis of determining suitability of a given project. The first physical property of soil is soil color, and this is very obvious. You can see it with your naked eyes. It has little effect on the behavior and use of soil, but it is very important when we are classifying soils and when we are assessing soils. So soil color may vary by horizon within a given profile, and it can have an indication on how fertile a given soil is. Let's now look at the main factors that influence soil color. The first one is the types of minerals that are present within a given soil and the degree of weathering. Then the second one is the abundance of organic matter. We all know soils that have a lot of organic matter tend to be dark in color. The other factor is soil moisture content, and finally oxidation states of iron and manganese. So we see that iron is mainly present in all soils, and it is the fourth most abundant element after oxygen, silicon and aluminium. So iron oxides are one of the most important coloring agents within the soil, and it can cause a variety of colors depending on the moisture level and aeration within the soil. So we can look at certain colors that are contributed to by the presence of iron. We have red or yellow, indicating good drainage and aeration. So if you look at soils and you realize they are red in color or yellow in color, then you should know that there is very good drainage and aeration in that particular soil. And then for soils that have poor drainage and aeration, we mainly have gray, green or bluish gray colors. So if you see any of these colors, you should be able to know that there is a lot of anaerobic conditions and the aeration in that particular area is very limited. And so now let's look at the most influential colors that we look at in soil physics. For well-drained soils, like we've seen, we normally look at the yellows or the reds, white, brown and black. So we see that white indicates prevalence of silica or salts. Red indicates accumulation of iron and aluminium oxides. Brown and black also indicate the level and type of organic matter that we have within the soil. And then for poorly drained soils, we normally see grey, blue-grey, or even green. So in order for one to be able to describe color of a given soil, one picks soil samples, and these small pieces of soil are compared to standard color chips in a special moon cell color chart, and this was developed in 1905. So the components of this moon cell color chart are the hue, which represents dominant or basic colors, and these are the reds, brown, and yellow. And then we have value, which indicates the lightness or darkness, and this is mainly varying from as low as 0, which represents black. Then chroma indicates the intensity, and here 0 would represent neutral gray. Let's now look at the second soil physical property, which is soil particles and texture. Define it as the relative proportion of sand, silt, and clay in a soil. Soil texture is usually expressed in percentage. So particle sizes vary, and they also help us to determine whether we are dealing with clay, with silt, with sand, or gravel. So there are different scales that we can follow. The first one is provided by the International Society of Soil Science, where clay is any particle that has a diameter of 0.002 millimeters and below. Then silt has between 0.002 and 0.02, and then between 0.02 and 0.2 we have fine sand. Then between 0.2 and 2 millimeters we have coarse sand, and then above 2 millimeters we have gravel. The only difference that we have between the International Society of Soil Science recommendations and those of United States Department of Agriculture is that silt is considered to be from 0.002 to 0.5 millimeters. And then sand particles are also further divided into very fine sand, medium sand, coarse sand, and very coarse sand. So that is how the two differ. And then the final one is the scale provided by United States Public Roads Administration. But since we are dealing with agriculture, it would be better to use the first two scales. Okay, so now let's look at how to determine soil texture. We can use two methods. We can use a texture feel method, where we rub a given soil sample that is moisturized between our fingers to feel whether it is smooth or not. Or we can use laboratory methods where we do either mechanical analysis or soil particle size distribution. And after the proportions of each soil separates are determined, then we can determine the texture class of a given soil using the USDA soil texture triangle, which is here. So in this triangle, we look at percentages of given particles of clay, silt, and sand. So you're able to locate which particular soil it is depending on the percentage of the particles you've been able to identify in the sample. Then the third soil physical property is soil structure, and this is the way individual particles of soil are assembled or glued together into clumps, which are called aggregates or beds. Aggregation of soil particles can occur in different patterns, and this results into different soil structures. So what is the importance of soil structure? One, it affects water and nutrient holding capacity of a soil. So in case you want to know whether the soils you're going to use will be proper for agriculture in terms of holding water and nutrients that are required for plant growth, then you can look at the soil structure. It also affects germination and root growth and development. So if we have a compact structure, then you know that you'll not be able to have proper growth and development of roots. It also affects water retention and transmission of fluids in the soil. It also affects soil aeration. Soil structure also influences soil thermal properties or soil temperature, and it also affects the strength of a particular soil. For us to be able to classify soil structure, we base on the shape of the aggregates. We can have a simple structure or the non-aggregated structure, or a compound structure, or what we also call the aggregated structure. So under the simple structure, we have the single grain and massive structure. And then under the compound structure, we have the granular or crumb, which is the spheroidal structure. Then we have the block-like structure, which has the blocky and the subangular blocky structures. Then we have the prism-like structure, which has the prismatic and columnar structures. And we have the platy structure, which has plate-like particles stuck together. This is what we've been talking about. The simple structure has the massive structure. It is massive, it doesn't have any shape. Okay, and then we have the single grain, which is almost like sand. Then we have the compound structure, where we have the spheroidal, which is granular or crumb in nature. The platy, which has flat-like structure. Then the blocky, which has angular blocky and subangular blocky. And then the prism-like structure, which has columnar and prismatic structure. Then we can also describe soil structure basing on the size and the shape of the pores. So some particles have coarse pores, which are above 200 micrometers. Medium pores, which have 200 to 20 micrometers. Then fine pores have 20 to 2 micrometers, and very fine pores have less than 2 micrometers. We can also classify soil structure based on the grade. Where we have single grain structures, then we call it a poor grade. Then we also have those that are weakly developed, and they mainly contain a lot of sand and silt. Then those that are well developed contain some amount of binding agent, and then those that are strongly developed contain a high level of binding agent. And the binding agents we are talking about here are mainly organic matter. So how are you able to know that this is a good soil structure or this is a bad soil structure? We normally look at the stability of the aggregates. So if the aggregates are stable, then it is good soil structure, like what we see here. If we have friable particles, it is also good soil structure. If we have a lot of pores, it is also good soil structure. If we have a high amount of organic matter, if the soil is well drained and it is not compacted, then all those are related to good soil structure. Then if we have unstable aggregates, very few pores and a lot of compaction or waterlogging, then that is a very poor soil structure. Let's now look at the fourth physical property of soil, which is density. We all know that density is the mass per unit volume of a given substance, and volume is a quantity of the three-dimensional space enclosed by a closed surface. For example, this inside surface is volume, and then mass is the quantity of substance contained in matter. So remember, we said that soil is a three-phase system, meaning that it is made up of air, water, and solids. So for us to know the density of a given soil, we have to consider the volume and mass of all these three components, which are air, water, and solids. So now let's look at bulk density. By definition, bulk density is the mass of solids per total soil volume, and therefore we can determine a bulk density by dividing the mass of solids over the total soil volume. And when we look at the picture before, that means we will get the mass of solids over the total soil volume. We should also note that bulk density is calculated for oven dry weight, so we do not expect any water, so the water is first removed by oven drying. So that means bulk density is determined by using only the mass of solids, but it is divided by the volume of the entire soil, which includes the solid and the pore space. We also see that bulk density is expressed in terms of grams per cubic meters or kilograms per meters cubed. Let's now look at particle density, which is defined as the mass of solids per volume of solids. And therefore, for particle density, we only consider the solid space. Okay, so for us to determine particle density, we divide the mass of solids over the volume of solids. Okay, if we can go back to our diagram, so we consider the mass of solids over the volume of solids in order to get a particle density. Particle density is also expressed the way we express bulk density, and that is in grams per cubic meters or kilograms per meter cubed. Let's look at the factors that affect bulk density. One is the texture of the soil. Two is the clay types. So if we have a lot of clay or less clay, that will also determine bulk density. The amount of organic matter in the soil will affect bulk density. The soil profile depth will also affect bulk density. The structure or aggregation of soils will also affect bulk density. The tillage practices and the compaction within a given area will also affect bulk density. Okay, let's now look at the fifth soil physical property, which is porosity. Soil porosity or soil pore space is equal to the volume of soil that can be filled by air and water. Remember when we talked about the three-phase system of soil, we said that soil has the solid space and it also has the pore space. So in terms of porosity, we look at the pore space. So it is a ratio of the pore volume. So we only look at the volume of the pore space over the total soil volume. We also see that porosity is expressed as volume or as a percentage. And then we also see that porosity does not indicate the size of the pores or indicate how many large pores or small pores that we have in a particular soil. Okay, so we see that a pore space can range from 30 to 75%. Remember, we said we can express it in terms of percentage. However, an average soil has about 50% of pore space, and that is the 25-25 we talked about. Okay, but we said it can vary between 20% to 30%. Then we see that compaction decreases porosity because the space of the pores is reduced when there is compaction. So therefore we see that porosity varies depending on particle size and aggregation. And then we also see that clay soils contain less pore spaces compared to sandy soils. Let's now look at soil moisture conditions. We realize that soil moisture varies, and as agriculturists we should be so much interested in the saturation of water within the soil. So there are terms that we use to describe the amount of water within the soil. The first one is saturation, and this is the water content when all pore spaces are full of water, as we see in the first picture. So all pores are full of water, and gravitation water is lost, so excess water can be lost, okay, because all the pore spaces are filled. And then we refer to filled capacity as the maximum amount of water a soil can hold in the micropores against the force of gravity. So this is when all the pore spaces are saturated with water and no excess is lost due to gravitational force. So we call that filled capacity. So that is the amount of water available for plant growth. Then we have what we call permanent wilting point, and this is the point at which plants cannot obtain enough water for growth. Okay, so at wilting point we have no more water available for plant growth. We also have the water holding capacity as another term, and this is the amount of water a soil can hold at filled capacity. And this water holding capacity varies with texture, and it can also be reduced by compaction of a given soil. We also have what we call plant available water, and this is the difference between filled capacity and permanent wilting point. The other soil physical property is soil temperature, and we see that soil temperature regulates quite a number of processes, which include chemical processes and biological processes within the soil. These processes include seed germination and growth of a given plant, microbial activity, which is mainly very slow, above 35 degrees Celsius, and below 6 degrees Celsius, then most of the microorganisms become inactive. So as the temperature has increased, the activity increases, but it reaches a certain point where it ceases to happen. And then we also have decomposition, where we see that temperature speeds up the process of decomposition. And so temperature is very important in processes like decomposition of organic matter. We also see that clay soils tend to be cooler or colder, and then sandy soils tend to heat up or warm up faster than clay soils. Let's look at now the factors that influence soil temperature. The first one is climate, which includes rainfall and temperature. So if we have a lot of rain, a lot of precipitation, then the soil temperatures will cool down. And in case the rains are not as much, then we will have the temperatures of the soil increase. And then the water levels in the soil, we see that soils that have a lot of water or wetter soils tend to be cooler. And this is the case mainly for clay soils. And then soil color, we see that dark soils, which are high in organic matter, absorb more heat and so tend to be warmer than soils that have less organic matter. And then plant cover, places that have a lot of plant cover are subject to having a less temperature fluctuations. And this is mainly because there is a cover that prevents the soils from heating up with increase in temperature. Then we also have soil depth, where we see that lower layers of the soil tend to have lower temperatures and less fluctuations, and this is mainly because they are not as much exposed to temperature increases due to sun rays. Then we have another soil physical property, which is consistency. And consistency is the ability of soil to stick to itself or to other objects. Okay, so there is cohesion and adhesion respectively. It is of approximate use and in predicting cultivation problems and engineering of foundations. So knowing the consistency would definitely help you predict if cultivation will be okay in a given area or not, or if engineering foundations will be strong enough or not strong enough. So consistency is measured at three moisture conditions: air dry, moist, and wet. So in those conditions, the consistency quality depends upon the clay content. So in the wet state, the two qualities of stiffness and plasticity. So in the wet state, the two qualities which we look at when we are talking about consistency, which are stiffness and plasticity, are assessed. Okay, so you wet the soil particles or the samples and you test for stiffness and plasticity. However, when the soils are dry or in their dry state, we test for resistance to fragmentation and crumbling. Okay, so how easy is it for you to crumble a given sample if it is dry? And then in moist state, we look at the resistance to shearing forces. So for us to describe consistency, we use the following terms. When we are talking about consistency of dry soils, we talk about loose soil, slightly hard, hard, very hard, and extremely hard soils. And then for the moist soils, we talk about loose, very friable, firm, very firm, and extremely firm soil particles. And then for consistency in wet soils, we talk about stickness, and that's where we talk about soils being non-sticky, slightly sticky, very sticky, non-plastic, slightly plastic, or very plastic. Okay, so now let's look at tilth. Tilth is the physical condition of soil that describes its suitability for growing crops. So in case you want to talk about the ability or the suitability of a given soil or given area for plant growth, then we talk about the tilth of that particular area. So there are factors that determine tilth of a given area, and these relate to the soil physical properties that we've talked about. One is aggregate stability, then moisture content of a given soil, then soil aeration or porosity, the rate of water infiltration, and then drainage of that particular soil. So for us to be able to understand whether a given soil has the right tilth for proper growth and development, we look at all these factors. We also see that good soil management practices should therefore seek to improve the tilth of a particular soil. So that's why we carry out things like minimal tillage, we add manure into the soil, we do cover cropping, we also do mulching. All these practices are aiming at improving the tilth of a particular soil. Now let's look at tillage. Tillage is a physical or mechanical manipulation of soil for purposes of crop production. So tillage affects soil structure, it affects soil water conservation ability, it reduces weed infestation, it affects the rate of decomposition of soil organic matter, it affects the population of soil fauna, it affects soil temperature, it affects the rate of seed germination and emergency, and it also affects crop growth and yield. So we have different types of tillage. The first one is zero tillage, and this involves planting on a piece of land without the use of any farming machinery such as tractors or plows. Okay, so when we are doing zero tillage, the weeds are destroyed with the aid of herbicides before planting. Okay, or we can also do slashing in case we don't want to use chemicals. So the advantages of zero tillage are that there is maximum soil erosion control. The soil moisture is also conserved because we don't tamper with the soil. There's also minimum fuel and labor used because you don't require a lot of people to till the land. And then it also promotes soil carbon and nitrogen sequestration. The second type of tillage is minimum tillage, and this involves use of primary tillage implements such as plows for soil preparation before planting, but it can also be referred to as reduced tillage because we do not use a lot of the farming implements. The advantages are that there is less erosion, so there is some degree of control of erosion. There is excellent incorporation of planting materials within the soil. Thank you so much for listening, and in case you have any questions about this topic, kindly forward them so that we can discuss them in our next virtual session. May God